Ah, the French.
So on Saturday I did what many of you cinephiles did. I sat down in my couch and I opened up Netflix to watch David Fincher's latest film, Mank. And what an enjoyable blast and a riddle of a film it was.
Mank?
It kind of reminded me of, well, you already know what I'm about to say. Not only does Mank give us the backstory of the 1941 masterpiece many of us have longed for, but it also does it in a very appropriate and resembling fashion. Citizen Kane is well known for being the ultimate enigma, delving deep into the human condition, the effects of power, betrayal, and materialism. Mank is similarly also an enigma, but in a different way. While Citizen Kane is about unveiling the riddle of the man Charles Foster Kane, which we all know at this point is based on the American multimillionaire William Randolph Hearst. The riddle in Mank is more about Herman Mankiewicz's grievance towards Hearst and his motivation behind writing Citizen Kane in the first place. As we learn, there are several reasons to why Herman Mankiewicz writes the screenplay, but there is one centerpiece which in itself is a riddle. I am of course referring to the
parable of the organ grinder's monkey.
The organ grinder's monkey is sort of like Mank's Rosebud, as it is the jigsaw piece that unites the puzzle or the story. As an experienced writer, Herman knows very well how a story structure defines the story itself as the skeleton of its body.
The narrative is one big circle like a cinnamon roll, not a straight line pointing to the nearest exit. You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one.
This idea about the structure really intrigued me into wanting to investigate exactly how Herman Mankiewicz had applied this himself in his own work. And so I thought it was time to rewatch the film Robert Ebert famously referred to as the greatest movie ever made. While I watched Citizen Kane again, I took some notes where I broke down the entire film into 28 parts. I knew I could simplify it better though, and so I watched the film again and broke it down into 20 parts. Still, I didn't feel like I was quite there, so I imported the film into my editing software and skimmed through it. Again, I took some notes and were able to this time break the film down into its bare skeleton in 8 parts. But still, there's just something Yeah, okay, that's better. I chopped the film up into different parts, categorized them by color, and put them in different tracks according to the order 1 to 8. Now, this timeline doesn't quite make the case for the structure of Citizen Kane to visualize the spiral pattern of a cinnamon bun as strongly as I thought it might, other than the fact that I color-coded the ending section brown, but that's not making my point come across very well. So I took the time span of each part and divided it by the total length of the film minus the credits so that I could draw a circular timeline where the individual parts and placements were of equal length to those in my premiere timeline, only now in a circle. After a bit of math, I got the proportions as exact as I could, and sure enough, it looks like a cinnamon bun. Right? So now let's get into the true brilliant beauty of how this story is told in structure and works its way inwards to the centerpiece of the cinnamon bun.
Rosebud.
By the revealing of different perspectives. The film's dramatic angle is clear from the first part, which I'll call introduction/setup, where we witness Kane's death and are immediately introduced to Rosebud. Without any context, this all means nothing at this point. And so we're thrown into the second part, which I'll call the information.
News on the march!
The newsreel is an abrupt change of both pace and tone, and gives us the scoop on this man's life, but all in headlines. Here we're bombarded with surface-level information about Kane, and his public persona. And once it's over, we're with a group of reporters from Kane's known newspaper, The Inquirer, or as they call it in the film, The Inquirer, where we're introduced to the mystery at hand. I call this third part The Search for Rosebud. This part exists as the film's present and is the glue that holds the entire film together. From here, one of the reporters head out to investigate.
Eyes calling just for that one word. But who is she?
Wait a minute, this is the first maneuver of misleading information Herman Mankiewicz throws at us. We now all assuming that you haven't seen the film before, that Rosebud is a woman because we are looking at the situation from the perspective of the group of reporters that clearly seem to have a lack of imagination when it comes to identifying Rosebud. There's not even an argument about it. We all just assume it has to be a woman. And so the journey now starts as Thompson, aka reporter, is sent out to talk to the people closest to Kane to solve the Rosebud mystery and give the newsreel, because a newsreel has to have an angle.
I know that, I read the paper.
The first person he sees is his second wife Susan, who's drunk and isn't ready to speak, or
Get out!
the story isn't ready for her perspective yet. So the reporter goes instead to read Mr. Thatcher's manuscript. Surely the man who raised Kane must have some sort of insight to his life. As the reporter sits down to read, we're thrown into the fourth part of the story, which I've called Childhood to Empire. We travel back to 1871 and witness the only moment in Kane's upbringing that we get to see, which is the moment his parents sells him away to the banker Mr. Thatcher. It's clear that Kane's father is easily convinced by the $50,000 check they'll receive each year.
Let's hope it's all for the best.
But his mother seems to have different motivations.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thatcher. What that kid needs is a good thrashing.
That's what you think, is it, Jim?
Yes.
That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him.
Already at this point, we've been given the necessary information to solve the Rosebud mystery, but where's the actual sensory? See, Herman Mankiewicz knew very well that no one would accept an answer that wasn't directly tied together with the sensory. Intuitive and emotional connections are simply not good enough, hence the reporter's attitude.
You're not Rosebud, are you?
What?
Rosebud. And your name is Jennings, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for the use of the hall.
The reporter is at no point in the story trying to put one and two together. He's a nobody with a singular objective, which is to identify Rosebud the woman. The reporter leaves unimpressed and heads directly to the next man on the list, Mr. Bernstein, Kane's longtime companion and colleague, which puts us in the fifth part I call Successes and Losses. This part is kind of like a biography version of Kane's life. From Mr. Bernstein's perspective, Kane's life is a success story, and so that's what he gives us. From the early days, leading all the way up to Kane's first marriage. This is where he leaves us with an anecdote about how Kane has lost everything in his life. And so Rosebud,
Maybe that was something he lost.
this point leads us a step closer to the truth. Again, if we're able to get the notion that Rosebud has to be a love interest out of our heads, we can easily connect the dots back to the first thing Kane ever lost, back in 1871. But our guy, the reporter, cares not for any of that wishy-washy BS. He's on a schedule and has to keep moving, and so he goes to see Mr. Leland, who supposedly is Kane's only friend. This marks the sixth part I've called Personal and Political Life, where Leland puts Kane's public persona to rest and rather delves into his promises, lies, and contradictions. This is the part where we truly get to know Kane on a personal level, and Mr. Leland is probably the one who is best able to explain the man. He's been alongside Kane since he first took over the paper, and
I can remember absolutely everything, young man. That's my curse.
we watch Kane's political campaign crash into the ground when his opponent Jim Geddes blackmails him by threatening to publish about the love triangle he seems to be in the middle of. Kane refuses to be stepped on by another powerful man.
Geddes! I'm gonna send you to Sing Sing!
And breaks in the process his declaration of principle he once gained the public's trust with.
I'm afraid we've got no choice.
This one?
That
After the loss, Leland confronts Kane about his dark side, while Kane stands with his back straight and rejects Mr. Leland's perspective completely by belittling his character. Kane now does not have a single friend in the world,
You're fired.
but seems to not mind. When we come back to the present, Leland is able to extract his perspective of the man perfectly in only a few words.
All he really wanted out of life was love. That's Charlie's story, how he lost it. You see, he just didn't have any to give. Oh, he loved Charlie Kane, of course, very dearly. And his mother, I guess he always loved her.
Yet, the reporter has still not found what he's looking for, and so he travels back to Susan, who is now finally ready to deliver her side of the story. This is the 7th part that I don't think I could find a more fitting title to than The Man. Here, Susan speaks openly about her dysfunctional marriage with Kane, and we're exposed to the ego, the ugliness, emptiness, and misery behind the once charismatic figure.
You're awful funny, aren't you? Well, I can tell you one thing you're not going to keep on being funny about, and that's my singing. I'm through. I never wanted to in the first place.
You'll continue with your singing, Susan.
Where Kane puppeteers an unfit career for a woman he never really had any interest in other than to use her for his own grudge against the world.
My reasons satisfy me, Susan. You seem unable to understand.
When Susan leaves Kane, he's lost.
I can't do this to you. Oh, yes, I can.
Both the reporter and Susan feel bad for how his life turned out, and the mystery of Rosebud almost seemed to be forgotten just for a second.
Oh, what do you know? It's morning already.
Enter the Inside Man.
I tell you about Rosebud.
We're now in the 8th and final part of the film,
$1,000?
The Sensory. The Inside Man working in Kane's castle finally gives us the long-awaited sensory, a glass ball containing a winter landscape, the one sensory that made Kane crack.
Well, that isn't worth $1,000.
But the reporter is still confident he hasn't cracked the code and calls quits when he's unable to connect the dots without the missing jigsaw piece. But the narrative is not quite finished just yet. As the group of people walk out, we finally witness the missing piece in the ocean of expensive garbage, Rosebud. And on top of it all, the film is brought full circle when the camera reveals again the opening shot of that says, "No trespassing," 2 words left with more than one interpretation and context of our now broadened understanding of Charles Foster Kane, a man who locked himself away from the world because he could not love. With a core ideal that strikes us more important than any. It is truly marvelous to see how Herman Mankiewicz was able to weave the story together in such a perfect harmony by giving us the bare essentials, a man's public persona, to then working his way inwards through the reveal of different perspectives, to then distilling his essence into the simplest sensory term, an old wooden sled with the word Rosebud written on top. Now, about the parable of the organ grinder's monkey, I mentioned of course that this was Mank's Rosebud in the way that it perfectly distills the essence of the man Herman Mankiewicz, or at least his motivation to write Citizen Kane against all odds. Towards the end of Mank, William Hearst walks the drunk man over to his door while he tells him the parable of the organ grinder's monkey as an obvious parallel to Herman Mankiewicz and his silly behavior. These are William Hearst's last words to Mank, right before he throws him out for good.
Goodbye.
With clear intentions of not wanting to be defined by this comparison, Mank voluntarily takes on the uphill battle of fighting the most powerful man in the country with what he does best, by writing his story. Of course, he does this to prove the man wrong, which is part of what Mr. Leland talks about in his dialogue to discredit Kane.
He thought that by finishing that notice, he could show me he was an honest man. He was always trying to prove something.
Is Herman Mankiewicz contradicting himself here? Or is he just lending from his own life to write a story? I think the latter is always true in any good writer. The real big difference between Hearst and Mank lies in that of their capacity for love. And so I'll leave you here with the most beautiful definition I have yet to find to best describe the force of love. And if you want to see more content like this, you know the drill. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you around.
And the winner of the Best Original Screenplay is Herman J. Mankiewicz